Today is September 19th, 2021, and it's a cloudy, hot day, and I thought I would make a little video of a tour of my phonograph collection. And I thought I would do this because sometimes people want to talk about the phonographs and I just don't have time to give them a one-on-one tour in the shop. So what I'm going to do is pretend that a customer's here and wants me to explain what's going on with all these phonographs I've got in my frame shop. So we'll start over here at this corner. There's a sound sponge and an echo catcher and a box of springs. And for centuries, people had tried to figure out a way to record and play back the human voice, and nothing really worked until 1877 when Thomas Edison was working on improving the speaker of a telephone and working on improving the telegraph dot and dash recorder. He got to thinking that if he put a stylus in the center of the speaker of the telephone, it might record sound vibrations like the telegraph recorder recorded dots and dashes. So he drew up these real crude plans and gave the plans to his machinist, John Cruzy, and they came up with the Edison tinfoil phonograph. And this photograph is taken out of the Edison Historical Site in Orange, New Jersey, and that's the real first phonograph under the bell jar. There's only one of those, but I've got an exact copy here that was made by my friend in Oaks, North Dakota, who owns a machine shop. And Edison put tinfoil, which is a lot like lead foil more than tin. It's very supple, around the drum, and then yelled in one end, "Mary had a little lamb," and laughed. And the first time they recorded the voice, it played back, and that was November of 1877. And he kind of was in so many things that he left his baby, and other people took off with his invention and came up with the cylinder record. The cylinder record allowed you to play music and interchange records at will. You no longer, played a sound and then took the tinfoil off and had the tinfoil would be destroyed. You can't really put the tinfoil on and off. So as you can imagine, this was a huge improvement to have a cylinder record that was playable over and over. And Edison was very upset to see people had taken over his invention, so he worked night and day and came up with his own cylinder players, and he made the cylinder players standard through opera and sold many of them. And the people that came up with the cylinder that was interchangeable were Bell Tainter and his partner, and they started the Columbia Phonograph Company. And the main reason they called it the Columbia Record Company is they visualized the phonograph as mainly a business machine that you would dictate into the cylinder and record what the secretary should type. And their biggest customer was in Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, so that's how they came up with the name Columbia. And scattered all around the shop are the Victors 1 through 6 and the Edison Standards, Standard, Home, Fireside, Opera, and Triumph and Gem. And they have nameplates underneath all the phonographs so you can see which ones are which. And the Standard over here in this corner with the blue horn, they made 1.5 million of. The Home they did about 1 million of. And the rest of them that I described was fewer and fewer made until you get to the very rare Edison Concert. That's the one here with the big brass horn that plays these 5-inch cylinder records. Those brown things up there are the cylinder records, And these were also used in concert halls, but people would have them in their home. And in the early days, it was kind of a status symbol. The bigger your horn was, the more affluent you were. So they would have these huge machines with the big horns on their tables, but they would be, the horn would be suspended from a thing that looked like a big bird cage crane, and not sitting up like this, suspended from the ceiling. But way back then, they did put on concerts in halls that, you know, people would pay money to watch a guy demonstrate an Edison phonograph. And as you can imagine, never hearing a human voice recorded and played back, to now hear it at a concert was just amazing. In fact, some people said if Edison invented the phonograph 100 years earlier, they probably would have burnt him at the stake as a witch. But the audience, a lot of people just couldn't believe it. They thought it was some trick with a ventriloquist or band behind a curtain or something like that. But these really took off, and they sold many, many phonographs, and pretty quick. It was in 1906 that they invented design of the internal horn phonograph. That's where there's, you know, their floor model, more like a piece of furniture than scientific kind of looking with the horns. And these were sold by the many, many millions, the different floor model phonographs. This one over here is a Edison diamond disc phonograph that plays 1/4-inch thick records. This is a Victor Victrola that plays a normal record, and then the sound, you open the little doors and sound comes out. And but these are quite plentiful, most models of floor model phonographs, and the ones with the horns were sold in much, much less quantity. And it took me about 30 years to put this whole collection together. Up over on this level of shelves are the Victors 1 through 6, all in order, all with original wood horns, starting with the 1 and going over here to the 4, 5, and 6. And as you can see, the 4 and the 6 were mahogany, and the 5 was oak. And way back then, these were all normally sold with the larger version of a black and brass bell metal horn. But way back then, it cost an average guy about a month's salary difference in the price to go upgrade to a wood horn rather than metal horn. So there's not a lot of wood horns that survived. They're so fragile. And then they didn't make anywhere near as many wood horns as they did metal horns. So having the 1 through 6 all with original wood horns is something that's very unusual for a collector to have all of them with wood horns. And as you can imagine, the 1 was lesser expensive than the 2, and 2 less than 3, and so on down the line. And if you could afford a Victor 6 with a wood horn, most people wouldn't upgrade to a wood horn and put it on a Victor 1, because that was the least expensive of the line of Victors. But these were all sold around 1906 is probably an average date, but they started in about 1902. And then scattered throughout the shop are some rarities that are real hard to find. Like here's a talking doll. Those little blue things are cylinder records. And then next to it is Edison concert. That those brown things on the right, those are cylinder records. So I have an example of largest horn and largest cylinder record from the Edison concert, and smallest horn and smallest cylinder record from the talking doll. There's a little mechanism that is left to the talking doll that's actually a cylinder player. And then we have a This is a phonograph lamp that's actual lamp, and there's a bulb. But if you wanted to play a record, you lift up the shade and there's a record player. Now, why someone would think this is a good idea just seems crazy to me, but it's pretty cool. And then next to that we have a coin-operated cylinder player. You put a nickel down the slot and it plays a cylinder, and it has listening tubes like earbuds. But as you can imagine, having earbuds in hundreds of different ears doesn't seem very sanitary, but the reason they did that is these would be in bars and cafes, and if you had 2 or 3 of these next to each other, you wouldn't want 2 or 3 songs playing out a horn at the same time, so they used listening tubes, and that hole that has the listening tubes also fits a horn, so if you did want to put a horn on there, it would fit just fine. And over here is a example of the odd spindle size machines. If you can notice these records hanging in the window here, and there's something unusual about the opening in each record. A normal record has a 3/16 inch hole in it, and all these machines have different size spindles in the turntable, and so they would put ads in newspapers and magazines for these very economical phonographs, and people would get them and try and play their normal records on them, and the records wouldn't fit, so then they would have to pay a lot more and buy the more expensive records specific to each machine. And scattered throughout the shop is, I like coin-operated things too. Here's a national cash register from 1908. If you notice, the highest number on it is $1 on the key. And when you think about it, back in the turn of the century, very few things cost more than $1. These were used a lot in tobacco shops, candy stores, barber shops, and they're pretty hard to find, these little ones. And then I have a clamshell mutoscope over here that you put in a penny and it plays a movie out of hundreds and hundreds of cards. And just recently I finally got a reel so that you can see what cards look like inside of the machine. So there's a reel with 800 individual cards, and the cards flip in front of you and they create a movie. And over here is a area digger machine that you turn the crank and it picks up prizes in here, and they used to use these in carnivals and would have about a dozen on a wagon. But the thing is so rigged that most people didn't do well playing these, and it's kind of deceiving because you'd think you could just go in and pick up buckets full of nickels and drop them down the chute and make a lot of money, but there's a box built an inch away from the glass and an inch tall, so there isn't really an inch deep layer of money. And if you happen to catch anything, what they would do is put the best things to the left of the machine, and if you happen to get it, by the time it was in the bucket and you got to the center, the machine shakes and would usually make the prize drop out so it wouldn't go down the hole. So these were kind of rigged. And then if they really wanted to get sneaky, there's screws on the end of the bucket, and if they loosen those a little bit, the bucket will not pick up anything. It just kind of limply goes over it, and you can't really pick up anything. So these were quite a rigged deal. And then over here we have some music boxes. This is a Regina Myra 18.5-inch disc music box, and these were well, this music box was bought at the Bonanzaville auction a few years ago, and they play 18.5-inch disc, and they're real hard to come by. And this one used to belong to the governor of North Dakota, Governor Andel, and when I bought it, it wasn't working. I can't really say that. When they auctioned it up for sale, it wasn't working, but it was laying in the grass by the building, and a friend of mine just wound the crank like he was crazy, and all of a sudden the spring caught to the little rivet head, and the thing's been working ever since, and I've had it now a few years. I'll play it for you in a little while at the end of the tour here. And over here's a Regina music box that's got a 15.5-inch disc, and here's a cylinder music box that the little teeth on the cylinder, or the prongs on the cylinder that stick out, pluck the teeth like a teeth on a comb. And then we have a roller organ over here, and that's the pins in the cork cylinder make the notes on the organ. And then we have a example of a couple radios. We have a early breadboard radio. That's this thing that looks like tubes on a board. And then we have a fancier radio that was a Minnesota radio. But this breadboard radio is very hard to come by, and I got this at an auction. It was one of 3 auctions I went to that day, and I got there late, and this was on a junk wagon, and I knew right away what it was, even though when I bought it, it had no tubes in it or anything. It was all covered with spider webs and dust. But I just had gotten my number, ran up to the auction, and the guy held it up, and he says, $1, $1. Do I hear $1? And I raised my hand, and I got it for $1. And these normally sell around $900 and up, depending on which one. And so I love having this in my collection because it was fun to buy something that was so rare for such a good price. And over here's a first attempt at an automatic record changer, and there's a ring around the turntable that pivots up, and would the record would slam down that slot into the left, and about 1 out of 3 records broke. So they didn't sell very many of these because they broke the record so bad. So this is another thing that's hard to come by. Now here's an Edison business phonograph, and they use these a lot in business, you know, where the boss would record, and then the secretary would type what he said. And this is an early one with the oak case. The later ones had tall metal cases with cabinet, metal part of the cabinet that had the cylinders that you record on and play back. And here's it's a coin-operated stereoscope viewer. So you put in a penny and then look down that you know, that eyepiece there, and then it would flip a bunch of stereo cards in front of you. And these are kind of naughty cards, which are quite rare, but they're not as naughty as watching 5 minutes of HBO. You know, for the time they were kind of naughty, but I put this machine in front of it so I won't have, you know, people looking at the cards. And here's a whole rack of stereoscopes and stereo cards. And by the way, this rack used to be the rack that Hefner's grocery store had that all his charge books in. And when we bought the store, this was full of charge books. And Earl and Aggie Hefner were still alive to see us get the store, and I got a chance to ask Earl about this because I went through a bunch of the charge books, and they went all the way back to the 30s. And I asked him, I said, what's with all these unpaid charges on your accounts there. I said, I know there isn't a ton of profit in food, and here you let people charge month after month groceries without getting paid. I said, how could you do that? And he said, well, when the people need to eat, you can't not feed them. So here this gruff old character was letting people who needed food get by without paying them, and he would still give them food. And let's see, here's a set of chairs from an opera house. These were bought in Rockwood, Illinois, in an antique mall, and the guy in the antique mall had a mountain of these stacked on each other, and came from a whole big opera house. And I looked through all these different rungs, you know, there's 5 in a row. I looked through all these chairs, and I couldn't find one set that didn't have something wrong with it. So I told the guy if I could take a good seat out of this one and a good back out of that one and make one good set, I would take it. And he said, great, we'll do that. So that's how I ended up with these, and they're pretty cool. They have they flip up, and then underneath is wires. And way back then, the guys with their stovepipe hats that squished flat, they could put their stovepipe hat under the chair so that the people behind them could see and not look around that great big Lincoln type stovepipe hat. So I was real thrilled to get that, but I got that at the same time I got the Naughty stereo viewer over there, and that was one of the many trips to the Antique Phonograph Society convention that's held in Union, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. And I went there 21 years in a row, and that's how most of these phonographs happened, was from going to the Antique Phonograph convention. But what I would do is throughout the year go to auctions every weekend from spring to fall and buy stuff that first I wanted to keep, but also buy stuff I could sell and make some money, and then I would save the money up and go to the phonograph convention and usually buy 1 or 2 really good things in a year. And so for every machine you see here, I probably bought and sold 10 phonographs of lesser interest to me to get the money to buy the ones that I wanted to buy and keep. And all these machines all have a story to them. You know, I can tell you where I got them, and you know, something, they remind me of the people that I got them from, and some were from running an ad in the Fargo's Forum. I ran an ad for years that it had $3 signs in a row, and then it said $1,000 minimum paid for any phonograph I need most for my collection. So that's how some of these happened. They came from, you know, local people, some of them too. But I'm going to shut this off, and let's see, I'll end over here. This is the last thing that I just got. I've always wanted a alabaster sculpture, and just got this in a couple weeks ago. Bought it on eBay, and I just love it. It's got such beautiful carving. It's from around 1890, and it was made in Italy, and I just love the detail of the necklace around the neck and the lace, and it's a young lady sniffing a rose, and if you shine a light behind her, it almost glows, because the alabaster just kind of you know, illuminates. I just love it. And one thing that made me buy it is that we were working on changing the tiny little grave marker for my 18-month-old sister who died of drinking furniture polish in 1954. And on the new marker, we're having engraved on it a tiny rose, lent not given, to bud on earth and bloom in heaven. And so when I was searching around eBay and saw this young lady sniffing a rose, and I was thinking about that grave marker for my 18-month-old sister. So it's one of those things I just had to have, and I just love it. And anyway, I'm going to stop this video here, and I'll do another one that explains some of the history of where these phonographs have come from. So this is kind of part one, talking about my little phonograph museum, and then part two will be me explaining how I came about getting this stuff. So we'll sign off now and record part two in a minute.